You never think it will happen to you. Sure, you hear about friends struggling through the agony of divorce for one reason or another. But when you deeply trust and love your partner, it feels impossible that you'll end up as another failed marriage statistic. Yet, when you consider how common divorce has become in today's world, it's hard not to question why people get married at all. That once meaningful promise of "till death do us part" has lost its weight over time, becoming little more than empty words. Looking back, I suppose I should have seen the signs, not from the articles or stories I've read online, nor from observing others. When you're in love, the world seems tinted with a rosy hue that clouds your judgment. It's even harder to see reality when you've built a life together, raising kids, owning a home, sharing dreams. You imagine growing old together, and the thought of that future breaking apart is almost too much to bear. Still, the warning signs were there, and deep down, I had seen them before. My upbringing offered a grim preview. My parents' marriage seemed rock solid when I was young. My dad worked tirelessly at a physically demanding job, pouring every ounce of himself into providing for his family. He loved my mom, and his sacrifices were made for what he saw as the greater good. My mom, for her part, went back to work once my younger sister started school. As kids, we were blissfully unaware of the tension bubbling beneath the surface, but hindsight painted a stark picture. It didn't happen overnight. My mother didn't jump into an affair immediately, but by the time I was a teenager, her behavior began to change. My brother, who was about 18 months younger, and my sister, 3 years younger, didn't pick up on it right away. But I noticed the shifts, the late nights at work, business trips that seemed more frequent than necessary, and her rushing to shower as soon as she got home. Her appearance also transformed. She dressed to impress, more for her lover than she ever did for our father. In those pre-smartphone days, her secret phone calls and sudden disappearances seemed odd but not impossible to dismiss. Until the day my father found out the truth. He had come home early, hoping to surprise her with a romantic afternoon. My mother had claimed she was out getting her hair done and running errands. Instead, he walked in to find her car in the driveway, alongside one he recognized as belonging to her boss, Daniel Carter. Suspicious, my father entered quietly through the back door and caught them together in their bedroom. His fury was instant. He physically confronted Daniel, who barely escaped our house, bruised and humiliated. What crushed my father even more was learning that adultery carried no legal weight in a no-fault divorce system. My dad tried to make her leave, packing her things, and even asking her family to take her in. They refused, ashamed of her actions. Her sister wouldn't help either. But since the house was jointly owned, my mother refused to move. My father was trapped, knowing that a divorce required them to live separately for at least 12 months. Unable to endure sharing a home with her, he eventually left, finding an apartment too small to accommodate us all. That left my siblings and me in my mother's care. I confronted her almost immediately, telling her exactly what I thought of her betrayal. She tried to justify her actions, but I made it clear I planned to live with my father as soon as I could. My younger siblings, however, were too young to understand, and I did my best to explain without overwhelming them. To her credit, my mother allowed us to continue seeing our dad regularly. Still, those first months were brutal. My father was a broken man, struggling to keep up appearances for our sake, though we could see through the facade. Late one night, he confided in me that we were the only reason he hadn't given up entirely. He vowed to fight for custody, even though it was a long shot back then. When the custody battle began, I was old enough to speak in court and made it clear that I wanted to live with my dad. Unfortunately, my brother and sister were too young to have their opinions taken seriously, and the judge awarded full custody to my mother. The only small mercy was that Australian laws didn't impose alimony like in the US, and child support was fair enough that my dad wasn't left destitute. The next 4 years were a nightmare. I grew to despise my mother, and she was well aware of it. Any man she brought home as a new partner faced my wrath. I made no effort to hide my contempt, calling her a cheater who destroyed our family. By the time I was 16, our relationship was irreparably broken, and I spent as much time away from the house as possible. School, a part-time job, or just aimlessly wandering. It didn't matter as long as I wasn't near her. Eventually, my father found happiness again. He met Rachel, a kind-hearted woman who had also been through a divorce. I supported their relationship fully, and she welcomed us into her life with open arms. Rachel had a daughter, and we quickly embraced her as part of our family. Though my father was cautious about remarrying, they built a strong, loving partnership and rented a house together. By the time I turned 18 and finished high school, I left my mother's house for good. Saying goodbye to my siblings was heartbreaking, but staying with her was unbearable. As I packed my car, my mother sobbed, but I couldn't muster any sympathy. My last words to her were harsh, a culmination of years of bitterness, and I left without looking back. Despite the scars of my past, I wanted to find love. I dated carefully, always wary of infidelity. Then, at 21, I met Samantha, a recent university graduate with a bright personality. We crossed paths at a corporate event where I represented my engineering firm, and she worked as a sales rep for a supplier. We clicked instantly, and by the end of the day, her number was in my phone. Ethan and I had decided to share an apartment to cut down on expenses. Splitting the rent and utilities made life a lot easier, and it wasn't like we were home much anyway. "So, is this the girl you met at the conference?" Ethan asked with a curious smirk. "Yeah," I replied, trying not to sound too pleased with myself. I finally worked up the nerve to call her. Ethan grinned. "Good for you, man. Took you long enough." "Back off, Ethan. I was just being smart, waiting a couple of days so I didn't seem desperate. Besides, she sounded excited to meet up when I did call." After a quick shower and a splash of aftershave, I checked myself in the mirror. I didn't look too bad, at least not like a slob. My job paid decently, though it wasn't great yet, but I felt confident enough. Samantha and I had agreed to meet at a local bar, and I liked keeping things casual for first dates. Dinner and drinks right off the bat could lead to awkward expectations. Besides, I'd heard too many stories about men footing the bill for fancy dinners only to never hear from the woman again. When I walked into the bar and spotted her sitting at the counter, my heart skipped a beat. Samantha was perched on a stool, casually sipping her drink. Her eyes met mine across the room, and when she smiled, I felt an unexpected rush of nerves and excitement. We started with a couple of drinks and eased into conversation. She opened up about her job, admitting it was only temporary and that she'd been hired more for her looks than her skills. She laughed as she said it, but I could sense it bothered her. "Honestly, I feel like a piece of meat sometimes," she admitted, rolling her eyes. "You wouldn't believe how many married men hit on me. It's disgusting." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "Yeah, I get it. My own mother cheated, and I've realized that both men and women can be equally awful when it comes to fidelity." Curiosity had once led me to research infidelity statistics, and the results were staggering. The sheer number of people admitting to affairs was depressing, and Australia had a reputation for being one of the worst offenders. Samantha smiled and took my hand. "Well, you're different. You were a perfect gentleman when we met. You kept eye contact and didn't try anything unprofessional, at least until you asked for my number," she teased. I placed a hand on my heart in mock seriousness. "I swear, I'm as single as they come. Ask anyone." She laughed, taking my hand again. "Good, because I've been hurt before. But I have a good feeling about you." We decided to take things slow. For the first few weeks, we only met for coffee or drinks, but by our third night out, we shared our first kiss. By then, I had already told her about my parents' troubled relationship. She hugged me tightly, and for the first time, I felt some of the pain ease. A week later, drinks turned into dinner, and Samantha came back to the apartment I shared with Ethan. Thankfully, he spent most of his time at his girlfriend's place, so we had privacy. That night, we made love for the first time, and from that point on, our relationship deepened. Within a month, Samantha told me she loved me. I felt the same, and soon we started talking about a future together, moving in, buying a house, marriage, and eventually kids. Despite the shadow of my parents' failed marriage, Samantha had won my heart completely. She made it clear she wanted to be a wife and mother above all else. Before we got married, we decided to buy a house. Luckily, this was before Australia's housing market became so competitive. However, Samantha's bad credit and patchy employment history made her ineligible to co-sign the mortgage. On my own, I couldn't secure the loan either, but my father stepped in to help. He became a co-borrower, using his income to strengthen my application. Samantha was overwhelmed with gratitude, nearly crying when he told her she was like another daughter to him. Her parents adored me, so when I proposed 3 months after moving into our new home, everyone was thrilled. Our wedding day remains one of the happiest moments of my life. It wasn't a church ceremony, but a simple outdoor celebration in a park with a marquee for the reception. We spent our honeymoon on a Pacific island, enjoying sun, sand, and sea. Not surprisingly, that's when Samantha became pregnant with our first child. 9 months later, she gave birth to Emma, our beautiful daughter. Just 6 months later, she told me she was ready for another, and 18 months after Emma, we welcomed Michael into the world. After Michael, we decided 2 kids were enough. Samantha was against permanent solutions like surgery, so she simply went back on birth control, which had always worked for her. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Samantha stayed home with the kids until they both started school, then took on part-time work with hours that aligned with their schedules. Once Emma and Michael reached middle school, Samantha returned to full-time work, running her own real estate office. By the time we were 45, I was a regional manager for a national engineering company, and Samantha was thriving in her career. I traveled frequently, but was rarely away for more than a night. Emma had moved in with her boyfriend, a respectful, responsible young man I liked, and I suspected a wedding was in their future. Michael, meanwhile, was studying at university and living in an apartment near campus. After more than 20 years of marriage, I thought Samantha and I were still as in love as the day we said, "I do." I never once considered betraying her trust. Yet what happened to my father always lingered in the back of my mind. One day, Ethan's voice jolted me back to reality. "You think she's cheating on you?" he asked, stunned. "Mate, Samantha loves you. Why would you even think that?" I was blind, I admitted. I thought once Michael left home, things would go back to how they were. But she's been acting exactly like my mother did before my dad found out. Just thinking about my mother made my blood boil. I hadn't seen her in years, except for brief encounters at family events. Even at my wedding, she was only there because my father, now happily remarried to Rachel, urged me to be the bigger person. "So, what's your plan?" Ethan asked. "I'm meeting with a private investigator on Monday," I said. "I just need to know if she's cheating. I don't need photos or videos, just enough evidence to prepare for what's next." In this country, adultery may not be grounds for much legally, my father sighed, but if a man is smart and acts fast, he can still protect himself. He placed a hand on my shoulder, his expression heavy with sympathy. "I'm sorry, son. Truly." I took a long sip of my beer, nodding. "Me too. The worst part is, until I know for sure, I can't stop loving her. Maybe I'm just paranoid. Maybe I'm overthinking everything. But the signs are there, Dad. I just wasn't paying attention until it was too late." The next morning, I drove to my father's house. Rachel greeted me warmly at the door, as she always did. Seeing the look on my face, she didn't even hesitate. "Let me sit with you both," she offered gently. My father, ever perceptive, handed me a cold beer despite it being only 10 a.m. "Take your time," he said. I couldn't help but smile as he took Rachel's hand in his. They were still as in love as the day they got married. That kind of love felt like a rarity now. "I think Samantha is having an affair," I admitted, my voice heavy. Rachel sighed, and my father muttered under his breath, "Not again." I leaned forward. "I'm meeting with a private investigator on Monday. The signs are all there, Dad. The same things you told me to watch for when you found out about Mom." My father grimaced. "If she's cheating, she's done her homework on how to hide it. I've thought this through," I assured him. "You remember how you co-signed the mortgage years ago? Samantha never put her name on the title. Legally, I own the property, and when I transfer it to you, she'll have no claim. She'll be nothing more than a tenant." "You've planned this," Rachel observed, her tone cautious. "Yes, and if it comes to a divorce, I'll sign a month-to-month lease with you. She'll have limited tenant rights, but we can handle eviction legally if it's necessary. The house will already be in your name. You've really thought this through, haven't you? Rachel asked. I nodded. Samantha knew my stance on fidelity before we married. I told her what my mother's affair did to me and my father. I made it clear, if she ever cheats, I won't forgive her. Not once, not 100 times. Cheating breaks the vows, which means it also breaks our prenup. That way, I can walk away clean. No alimony. No spousal support. She earns as much as I do, and thank God we don't have those ridiculous alimony laws like the States. I drained the last of my beer, turning to Rachel. This whole thing just has me angry. Let's hope you're wrong, she said gently. When I got home, Samantha was curled up on the couch watching a movie. She looked up and smiled at me, her eyes lighting up as they always did. Where have you been? She asked. Met with Dad, I said casually. Needed some advice. About what? A job. There might be an opportunity coming up. I lied smoothly. The truth was I had no solid evidence, just suspicion. If she was cheating, she was being careful about it. There were no sudden girls' nights out or obvious red flags yet. Sometimes she worked late, but that wasn't out of the ordinary. That night, as she snuggled close to me in bed and whispered, I love you, I wanted so badly to believe her. Maybe she still did love me, but needed someone or something new. I whispered it back, meaning the words, but the thought of betrayal gnawed at me. Monday came, and I went through my usual routine. Breakfast, brushing my teeth, kissing her goodbye as she smiled and wished me a good day. I felt a pang of guilt, knowing that during lunch, I'd be meeting with a private investigator to start surveillance. When I arrived, I was surprised to be greeted by a woman. I'd expected an ex-cop in a trench coat, but she smiled warmly and got straight to business, outlining her process and fees. Will she notice the money moving around? I asked. No, she reassured me. Separate accounts are fine. The joint account won't be touched. What makes you think she's cheating? She asked. I explained the history, what my mother had done, what my father had uncovered, and how similar Samantha's behavior had been lately. How's your sex life? She asked bluntly. I hesitated. It was fine at first after Michael left, but 6 months ago, it slowed down again. I chalked it up to life getting in the way, but honestly, I'd still want her every night if I could. Just because I'm 45 doesn't mean I've lost interest. Noticed any other behavior changes? Yes. They're subtle, but they're there. You know the term red flags? Well, it's not a full communist parade yet, but there are enough to make me suspicious. She laid out my options: phone tapping, video surveillance, identity tracking, and more. Some of it was in a legal gray area, but I told her my priority was the truth. By Friday, I had given the go-ahead for surveillance to start the following week. It wasn't easy pretending everything was fine at home, and the thought of intimacy with Samantha now made my stomach turn. I eventually told her I wasn't in the mood, which upset her. Work stress, I said when she pressed, and she seemed satisfied with that. By Wednesday, my anxiety got the better of me, and I called the investigator to start immediately. The uncertainty was driving me insane. Was it all in my head? No wonder so many people are mentally wrecked after infidelity. The evidence came in faster than I expected. Within a month, everything was laid bare, and Samantha's true nature was revealed. By then, I had read every article and book I could find about cheating spouses preparing for this moment. My bags were packed, and my evacuation plan was in place. The workers knew I was leaving soon. I just had to set the date. The house was officially in my father's name, and Samantha's name was nowhere on the lease. With luck, she'd be out of the house within a couple of months, and I could finally start piecing my life back together. It was Friday evening, and I arrived home at my usual time. Normally, Samantha would be in the living room, watching TV with a glass of wine. Fridays used to be our night. We'd order takeout, talk about the week, plan for the weekend, and in the night snuggle together before heading to the bedroom. Back when things were good, Friday nights were a highlight. After the kids moved out, we couldn't keep our hands off each other, making love well into the weekend. But tonight was different. Instead of the warm routine we once shared, I heard her busy in the bathroom. The situation was so stereotypical that I nearly laughed at the absurdity. Grabbing a beer from the kitchen, I sank into the couch, waiting in the dimly lit room. When she finally appeared, she wasn't wearing her usual casual clothes or the sleek, alluring dress I might have once hoped for. Instead, she wore a short skirt, stockings, a blouse, and heeled shoes. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, and her jewelry subtle but striking. She looked stunning, absolutely radiant. Too bad it wasn't for me. "Oh, Mark, I didn't realize you were home," she said, stopping in her tracks. I kept my voice even, masking the emotions roiling inside me. "Got home at my usual time, Samantha. You've clearly been busy. Where are you going?" She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I'm going on a date tonight, Mark, with John from work." Her honesty, or maybe audacity, momentarily stunned me. "Why?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "It's just for work," she said, lying blatantly. I knew exactly who John was. He worked in the head office, was married, and had kids around our children's ages. He was the man she was having an affair with, and she didn't even try to hide it anymore. I'm not sure what she expected me to do. Beg, cry, plead, but I'd already made my decision. She knew my stance on fidelity, and I had no intention of compromising my self-respect for her betrayal. I stood up and met her gaze, holding it until she finally recoiled. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Have fun," I said, walking into the kitchen. She called after me, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "You're not going to say anything?" "No," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Fair enough," she said after a pause. "I'll be home later, and we'll talk then." I didn't answer, but followed her to the door. She stopped and looked back at me, guilt and doubt flickering across her face. Whether she felt remorse or just fear of the fallout, I couldn't tell, and didn't care anymore. "Good night, Mark," she whispered. "Goodbye, Samantha," I said firmly, watching her expression shift as she realized the weight of my words. She left, likely expecting me to be the kind of man who tolerates this kind of betrayal. But I wasn't that man. I wasn't a cuckold, and I wasn't interested in being part of any open marriage arrangement. This was the end for me. Once she was gone, I moved swiftly. I grabbed my pre-packed evacuation bag and added a suitcase, loading them into the car. Then I sat at the computer, systematically severing financial ties. I paid off and canceled our credit card, settled the upcoming bills, and transferred most of the joint savings into my personal account, leaving her just enough to cover a couple of months' rent and utilities. She'd be on her own after that. Possession is 9/10 of the law, and she owned nothing. The house was legally mine, and by the time she realized what had happened, I'd be long gone. Taking one last walk through the house, I felt a pang of nostalgia for the good memories we'd once shared. But they were tainted now, overshadowed by her lies. After grabbing a beer, I made 3 calls. The first was the easiest. "Dad, it's confirmed. She's cheating on me," I said, keeping my voice steady. "She actually admitted she's going on a date with another man tonight. The plan starts now." "Where are you going?" my dad asked, concern evident in his tone. "To Adelaide," I replied. "I've got a job lined up for the next 12 months. Once the divorce is finalized, I'll probably move back to Sydney. But for now, I just need distance." "All right, son. I'll make sure she doesn't find out where you are. Send me your new number and address once you're settled." "I will." "Thanks, Dad. And don't worry. I'm not doing anything stupid. I'm just leaving." "Good," he said with a sigh. "You're doing the right thing, Mark. It's not your fault. Naomi and I love you. Stay safe." The second call was to my daughter, Emma. Hearing her cry broke my heart. She sobbed as I explained the situation, her pain mirroring my own. I reassured her that I loved her and promised to stay in touch. The third call was to Michael. True to his nature, he was stoic, though he didn't hide his anger toward his mother. "What are you going to do, Dad?" he asked. "She deserves to know the truth," I said. "Beyond that, I'm not looking for revenge. I just need to move on." "Take care of yourself, Dad," he said firmly. I wrote Samantha a short letter explaining that I was leaving and that she'd hear from my father soon. I didn't detail my reasons, leaving that as a surprise for her. I placed the note, my wedding ring, and a folder of evidence on the coffee table before walking out the door. Driving away, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. All the stress and heartbreak seemed to melt away. Though I didn't know what the future held, I was finally free. Life felt pretty lonely, but Jennifer's visit had rekindled a spark in me. We spoke every night after that, and my son called every few days. My siblings were supportive, with my younger sister promising to visit as soon as she could. My father kept me updated on everything happening back home. Even my old colleagues from Sydney reached out, aware of my situation, though they mostly called to chat and share a laugh. About 6 weeks before Christmas, something unexpected happened. I was at the supermarket, wandering the aisles in boredom. Grocery shopping had always been something Samantha and I did together. We'd laugh, act silly, and turn a mundane chore into something enjoyable. Now, it was just another reminder of what I'd lost. I reached for a bottle of salad dressing, not noticing someone else reaching for the same one. Our hands collided, and I turned to see who it was. My jaw must have dropped slightly, because the woman blushed deeply, her cheeks coloring. "I'm sorry," I said quickly. "No, it's my fault," she replied. "I didn't notice you there. Please, take the bottle. I can grab something else." "I can't take it. It's the last one," I said, surprising myself with my next words. "Tell you what, you take the bottle if you agree to have coffee with me afterward." I didn't know who she was, what her name was, or anything about her, but that brief touch sparked something in me. She was beautiful, with an elegance that left me momentarily speechless. She smiled, taking my outstretched hand. "I am Mark," I said, shaking her hand and noticing how soft her skin was. "Do you often pick up women in supermarkets, Mark?" I grinned. "No, you're the first. And if you're married, I'll withdraw the invitation immediately." Her smile grew, and her blue eyes twinkled behind thin-rimmed black glasses perched on a delicate nose. Her full lips curved into a genuine grin. "I'd like to get coffee," she said softly. I handed her my number, and she texted me right away to ensure I had hers. "I need to finish my shopping and drop this off at home," she said, "but I can meet you in a couple of hours." "Does that work?" "Perfect," I replied. Before she pushed her cart away, she placed a hand lightly on my forearm. "See you soon, Mark." I couldn't stop smiling as I hurried through the rest of my shopping, using the self-checkout to get home faster. Once there, I shoved everything into the fridge and cabinets, showered, and dressed. Jennifer and I decided to meet at a nearby coffee shop, one I'd come to love since moving to the area. When she arrived, she was stunning in a sundress that felt too elegant for a casual coffee date. After buying her a drink, we sat and talked. She confessed she was impressed by my confidence in asking her out in the middle of a busy supermarket. "But when you touched my hand, Mark," she admitted, "I felt something." "It wasn't just me then," I said, my chest tightening at her words. "No," she said shyly, blushing. "I read about things like this, but thought it was just fantasy." She held out her hand, and when I closed mine around hers, she whispered, "I feel it again." Our conversation revealed bits and pieces of her life. She was a kindergarten teacher with no kids of her own, single, and living in a small apartment nearby. Her parents were in the city, and she had a younger sister. She was 35, 10 years younger than me, but she waved off the age difference. "All I care about is what kind of man you are," she said simply. When I admitted I was still technically married, her face faltered for a moment. I quickly explained my situation, that I'd left my wife, was living apart, and was preparing for divorce. She placed her hand over mine. "I trust you, Mark. I can see you're in pain, but I've seen that look before." She opened up about her own past, a controlling, abusive ex-husband who isolated her from friends and family. With her father's help, she escaped, divorced him, and started rebuilding her life. "It's been 7 years," she said quietly. "But when I met you, I felt something I hadn't felt in years." As I walked her to her car later that evening, I couldn't help but feel reluctant to say goodbye. Hugging her, I found myself not wanting to let go. "Call me this week, Mark," she said softly. "I'd love to talk to you again." "How about tonight?" I asked, making her giggle. "You can call me whenever you want," she said with a smile. I called her that night, and every night after. By Friday, I'd invited her to dinner. She accepted eagerly, and I spent the rest of the day feeling like a teenager. At the restaurant, she greeted me with a nervous smile, but when I leaned in to kiss her, She met me halfway. "Wow," she whispered, blushing. "If this is how you greet me on our second date, I'm already excited for the third." We talked easily throughout dinner, sharing stories about our lives. Jennifer was passionate about teaching and confessed that she hoped to have children someday. We shared a dessert and lingered at the table, reluctant to part ways. Later, at a quiet bar, she asked me what was on my mind. I told her everything: my marriage, my children, my wife's betrayal, and my move to Adelaide. "I'm still technically married," I admitted, "but my marriage is over. It's just a matter of time before it's official." She listened intently, her hand in mine. "Mark," she said softly, "it sounds like you've been through so much. But I hope you know, you're not alone. You deserve to heal and find happiness again." When I drove her home, I walked her to her door. She hesitated before pulling me into a kiss. "I had a wonderful night," I said, smiling. "So did I," she whispered. "Call me tomorrow, Mark." I smiled the entire drive home, already looking forward to our next date. Jennifer and I grew closer with each passing day. She'd text me at night, and one particular evening, her words struck a chord. "Jennifer, it's too early for anything but sleeping in the same bed, Mark." "Me? I'm tired of sleeping alone." "Jennifer, I am too. I'm already in bed. It's cozy, but it feels empty. It didn't feel that way until I met you." "Me? I'll pick you up at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Breakfast first, then the beach." "Jennifer, what's your favorite color?" "Me? Usually blue." "On a woman? Black or red?" "Jennifer, then I have the perfect bikini." "Sweet dreams, Mark." "Me? Sweet dreams, beautiful. Red heart." The next morning, I pulled up outside her apartment complex, only to hear a cheerful honk as she spotted me. I knocked on her door, and when she opened it, she greeted me with an infectious smile. "What do you think?" she teased, gesturing at her sundress. "I think I need a broom to fight off all the men," I joked. Her laughter was the perfect start to the day. She returned a moment later, dressed in shorts and a t-shirt, with her bag slung over her shoulder. I placed it in the trunk next to mine, and we drove to a beachside cafe for a hearty breakfast. By the time we reached the beach, it was already buzzing with people, but we managed to carve out our little spot in the sand. We spent the day alternating between sunbathing and wading into the water. As the sun began to set, Jennifer turned to me. "Would you like to stay for a drink?" "I'd love to," I replied honestly. "But if I stay, I won't want to leave." She stepped closer, her voice soft. "Go home, change your clothes, and come back. Stay the night." I didn't need to be told twice. I rushed home, packed a bag, and was back at her door within half an hour. She laughed at my breathless state, grabbed me by the shirt, and dragged me inside with a playful grin. That night was a turning point. By the next morning, she'd made me breakfast, and we spent the day lounging around her apartment in comfortable silence. At one point, I whispered, "Take your time, Jenny. We have all the time in the world." I knew I was falling in love with her. Maybe it was too soon, but I couldn't help but feel that fate had brought us together that day in the supermarket. Our relationship continued to blossom. We didn't text much during the day. Her teaching kept her busy, but we talked every night. I let my family back in Sydney know about Jennifer, and my dad kept me updated on Kylie's situation. She was on the verge of moving out, still convinced I was in Sydney and hoping to bump into me. Wednesday night finally arrived, and Jennifer prepared a meal that was nothing short of extraordinary. As we finished dessert, I patted my stomach. It's often said the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. She leaned in, her voice a whisper. "I love you." I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I love you too, Jenny. Isn't it too soon?" "Not at all. If that's how we feel, then that's how it is." She smiled. I knew on our first date over coffee. I knew I'd met the man I want to spend my life with. "If you want to move back to Sydney to be closer to your kids, I'll go with you." "You're sure?" "That's a big decision." "There's nothing keeping me here, Mark," she replied. "My parents are healthy, my sister is happily married, and my heart says I should follow you." By the time Christmas arrived, Jennifer had met my children. My daughter Charlotte, who was visiting with her husband, ran to me at the airport like she had as a little girl. She embraced Jennifer quickly, and soon they were both in tears. The next day, my son Michael surprised me, by knocking on my apartment door. When he met Jennifer, he gave me a knowing smile. Later that day, I brought everyone to Jennifer's parents' house. Her parents embraced my children as if they were their own, and we spent the day exchanging stories and laughter. That evening, Jennifer pulled me aside. "Mark," she began hesitantly, "I know it's too early for a proposal, but I want to spend my life with you. When you're ready, I'll be here." I smiled, pulling a small box from my pocket. Inside was a necklace and bracelet. "This is just the beginning," I said. Her eyes welled with tears as she put them on. After the holidays, Jennifer and I returned to Adelaide. A few months later, I filed for divorce, but Kylie tried to contest it. Sitting in the lawyer's office, I was floored. "She's contesting? Why?" I asked. "She claims you've abandoned her and wants counseling," the lawyer explained. "I haven't seen her in over a year," I countered. "We've lived separately. I've followed the law to the letter, and I can prove my residence in Adelaide. There's no case here." The lawyer nodded. "I'll handle it." "Jennifer, I assume you're Mark's partner?" "Yes," she said confidently. "We've been honest about everything from the start." The lawyer gave us a reassuring smile. "This will be over soon." Jennifer and I supported each other through the remaining hurdles. By the time the divorce was finalized, I was ready to propose. As I slipped the ring on her finger, her smile lit up the room. Our journey wasn't without its challenges, but it was ours, and it was just beginning. 3 days later, my attorney contacted me with unexpected news. Kylie had agreed to sign the divorce papers, provided I met with her one last time to talk. I discussed it with Jennifer, who supported whatever choice I made. My father and lawyer both advised me to go ahead with the meeting to settle things once and for all. "You're with Jennifer now," my father reminded me. "You're building a new life, starting a new family, and your kids will soon be with you in Adelaide. Let her say her piece, and then move on." Reluctantly, I agreed. The following week, Jennifer and I found ourselves at court. My lawyer explained that once Kylie signed the papers, the judge would finalize the divorce without delay. As Jennifer held my hand, I couldn't help but marvel at her unwavering support. When we entered the room, Kylie looked up, startled to see me arrive with another woman. I barely glanced at her as I guided Jennifer to a seat, pulling out the chair for her before sitting down myself. Jennifer laced her fingers with mine, resting our joined hands on the table for everyone to see. She leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder, making it abundantly clear where my heart now belonged. Kylie looked tired and worn. Her life had clearly been difficult since our separation, something I'd heard from my father and others, but I felt no sympathy. She had made her choices, and they had led her here. Her family, my children, and even her friends had distanced themselves from her. She'd lost everything. "Okay, Kylie," I said, breaking the silence. "Say whatever you need to so we can end this and move on. I have a life to live, and you're part of my past." She hesitated before finally speaking. "Who is she?" she asked quietly, glancing at Jennifer. "This is Jennifer Morris," I replied evenly. "Once our divorce is finalized, I will propose to her, and one day she will be Jennifer Williams. And I will gladly accept his proposal," Jennifer added, her voice calm but firm, "because I want nothing more than to be his wife and the mother of his children." Kylie's expression hardened. "You've moved on quickly." "I wasn't the one who cheated, Kylie," I said, my tone cold. "You were. You didn't even try to fight for our marriage. You broke our vows, and in doing so, you made my decision to leave very easy. Do you regret what you did?" "Don't bother answering. It doesn't matter anymore. You only regret getting caught." Her lawyer cleared his throat, trying to intervene. I silenced him with a sharp look. "Back off." She wanted to talk, and I have the right to respond. "It was just sex," Kylie murmured. I let out a bitter laugh. There it is, the classic excuse. You were my wife. Sex wasn't supposed to be just sex. It was supposed to mean something, and it was supposed to be with me. Kylie's tears began to fall. "I still love you, Mark," she whispered. "Good for you," I replied, my tone as cold as ice. "I don't care. You stopped being my problem the moment you betrayed me." Her lawyer finally stepped in, urging her to sign the papers and end things. With trembling hands, she signed her name, tears streaming down her face. It was over. 2 days later, I proposed to Jennifer on the beach, surrounded by our families. She could barely nod through her tears as I slipped the engagement ring onto her finger. 6 months later, we were married on the same beach, just a few steps from our new home. Jennifer glowed as she walked toward me, her growing belly a testament to our love and future together. 20 years later, life couldn't be better. Jennifer and I are as happy now as the day we met. We've built a beautiful life in Adelaide with our 4 children, and my older kids have flourished as part of our family. My father and Naomi lived with us until his peaceful passing, and we made sure Naomi always had a home with us afterward. My sister also joined us in Adelaide after her own marriage ended, eventually finding love again and marrying one of my closest friends. As for Kylie, she disappeared from our lives completely. I learned she moved to Queensland to start over, but I never inquired further. I let her go in every sense of the word. Looking back, I'm proud of the choices I made. I didn't seek revenge or cause unnecessary destruction. I simply walked away and built a better life. Reconciliation isn't for everyone, and for me, trust was irreparably broken. I made peace with the past and embraced the future, finding true happiness with Jennifer. Are you ready, Mark? Jennifer's voice broke through my thoughts as she entered the room, radiant in a red gown. I smiled at my wife, still as beautiful as the day I met her. I've been ready for 20 years. We kissed, and as we prepared to spend another evening, surrounded by the family we built together, I couldn't help but feel grateful. Life had come full circle, and I wouldn't change a thing.